Welcome to the Secret Stash podcast. So excited to have the legendary Eric Larsen on as our very first guest. Eric is an American polar explorer known for his very difficult and extremely dangerous expeditions. Eric is the only person on the planet to have summited Mount Everest and reached the North and South Pole in the same year. He is just an all-around badass and an incredible human being. Eric has been to the most extreme and remote places on the face of the earth and has decided to make his home right here in beautiful Crested Butte, Colorado. At the time of our interview, Eric wasn't feeling well and was unaware that just 16 days later he would be diagnosed with cancer. We have a link for donations in the show notes to ease this burden on his family so that they can focus on Eric's health and recovery. This episode is sponsored by The Mountain Store. It has been operating in the same location, 203 Elk Avenue, since 2004, specializing in mountain lifestyle clothing from brands like Cool, Prana, Outdoor Research, and Smartwool. So let's get started. When did you realize that just a normal life wasn't going to cut it for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's just, people always ask me, how did you get into this? And I have a terrible, founder story. I was listening to you, and you're like, I always knew I wanted to be in restaurants. I worked in restaurants. And for me, it's somewhat similar, but it's this drawn-out process in the sense that I just liked being outside and I liked camping. And I was always curious about the areas around me and what it was like to travel in them. And so it was kind of this feeling that was inside of me that, again, back in the day, growing up when we did, there wasn't a lot of guidance in any sort of direction. There wasn't groups or mentorship or internet to find out any other information. So I just did things and tried stuff because I was interested in it. And it was the more that I did, the more that I wanted to keep doing. And it was kind of this thing that snowballed, so to speak. And it wasn't like this straight path either. It was just trying to figure out how I could do this thing that was my passion, that I had a lot of joy from. But I also got a lot of inspiration from, books and stories. I read a lot as a kid. And so I read a lot of the historical journals of explorers. And so I definitely kind of had that mindset of oh man, that sounds really awesome. I wonder what that would be like.
When you are getting ready for these huge expeditions, what you've done is just phenomenal. I was completely blown away by all your stuff. How do you get into that mental space? I think mental space, and I know you've talked a lot of it about it in your movies, but in real life, I can draw a blueprint to build a restaurant.
Yeah.
But until I'm in there and I have staff moving around, the two don't correlate.
Totally. Yeah. It's funny, I love looking back at this whole process because it's not like what I did 10 or 20 years ago is the same as today. And just like you have a lot of knowledge so that the next time you open a restaurant, you're not starting out from scratch. And that frame of reference provides me a really strong springboard to keep moving forward, a lot of mental strength. But at the end of the day, it's just a process, and it's just getting everything dialed, and the work is never done. It's constant. It's getting all the equipment, getting all the food, arranging the logistics, training, doing all the marketing and PR. Just, you just start going down the list. And, I have this philosophy that's about train hard, travel easy. And that is trying to get all these variables. When we're going out in a situation, a lot of my expeditions are focused on going and doing expeditions in styles that people haven't done. So the whole thing is a question mark. And that's just a stressful situation to be in. And so what I try to do is take that whole big question mark and just start chipping away at some of those variables. And so that I can control these little things or at least quantify those. I know this gear works. Here's how I'm going to fix it. Here's my food menu based on X, Y, and Z in the temperature and the amount that we're going to be traveling and if we have a resupply or not. And here's the type of gear for this type of travel. And then at a certain point, you just got to go. I've always said that the best way to be successful is to put yourself in a situation where you don't have another choice.
Yeah, and it's got to be difficult when you were sitting in Resolute for a week, when you were waiting for that weather to break so you could go. During that week, you knew the time was ticking.
Oh, yeah.
You need to get out there. And then are you but like I'm saying, like in your preparations for things in your daily life, are you meditating? Are you visualizing? Are you seeing what you're doing? Are you training your mind mentally before you get out there? Are you a meditator?
I don't meditate per se. I do spend a lot of times in quiet, like by myself. Again, my wife makes fun of me because I'll go ride Deer Creek like 2 times a week by myself,
Yeah.
along with all the other ride I'm doing in the summer. And it's like not my favorite ride, but I'll just go do it. And I usually have an awesome time. So I don't focus on meditating per se, but that physical activity that I'm usually engaged in every day really relaxes my mind. And quite honestly, it does an even more important part for me, that it allows me to be creative because my body is occupied with something else. And that's when I start thinking about, all these different components of what I'm doing, how to communicate about it. Just some other tertiary projects. If I'm in between projects, it kind of helps me solidify the direction that I'm going when I'm kind of juggling a few different ideas. So I'm kind of, involved in that process in a very rinky-dink way.
Yeah. And then, like when you were in Resolute and you were sitting there, I mean, you're not letting that get to you. You're kind of just day by day. You're like, okay, we can't fly today, but that means there's less time to hit that goal.
Yeah. I mean, that's a different situation in the sense that's stress.
Yeah.
And that's also dealing with consequences. And when you gamble with your whole life savings and your whole future on one thing that's, has a variable outcome, there's a lot of pressure associated with that. And it can break people. And the other thing is to not have the ability to control your situation is also a very difficult thing for people to deal with. When we look at the COVID now and, it's very difficult for a lot of people. For me, the health issues and financial issues aside, which are huge, it's pretty similar to my expedition life where you're thrown in a situation you can't control everything. One of my other models, we're kind of something I was going to say earlier, but I'm just like, let's go out there and see what happens. So at a certain point, you can't hold on to everything so tight that you can't white knuckle it all together. And so you just have to deal with the variables as they come. And so something like sitting in Resolute is part kind of mental letting go. It's part just acceptance, and it's also experience, which is I've been in the situation, I can't do anything about it. And there's a personality type that's more suited to that, and there's a personality type that's less suited. I've been on, trips where we're stormbound for many days and you're in the tent not able to do anything, and it can drive people crazy. But again, at the end of the day, like, how do you be successful? You're here. You're either going to do it or you're not. And so that's often kind of the ultimate decider in those situations.
Yeah, I was watching you. I'm a restaurant person. I loved the food part of your show. You guys are burning 7,500 calories a day.
Yeah.
And how you guys portioned all your food for the 53 days, and you had, granola and the milk powder and the oatmeal, and then you put the butter in. And so I'm really interested in your diet out there because you are burning. I mean, you got to be burning more than 7,500 calories.
By the end, yeah. And again, one of the things I really like about what I do personally is that everything is related. And so you can't really take any little piece out of there and expect to be either moving forward on your objective or just simply trying to plan for this stuff. And so, it's like, if you don't have gear that works, you're going to be stuck out there. And the same thing goes for your diet. I mean, that's your gasoline, that's your fuel. And for better or worse, growing up in the Midwest, it probably trained me more for that than anything. Like bland, tasteless mush is what I pretty much grew up on. And so when I go out on an expedition and I eat bland, tasteless mush, I'm like comfort food, and we eat the same thing every day. I mean, maybe it's like spaghetti and beef stroganoff one night versus the other, but it's the same thing every day. But it's important. You need a balance of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats in the right proportions. Those affect your body in different ways. Carbohydrates are a quicker burst. Fats are a slower burn. You also need to be able to eat it when it's frozen. The biggest weights of our expeditions are food and fuel. So anything we can cut down on the weight or the prep time is huge as well. And so all those factors kind of play in to what that plan is. And
have you guys ever been in a situation where you're just like, I got to eat one more. I just got to have one of those baggies of food because I'm starving right now.
Yeah.
And you have to control yourself to not eat it.
Totally. Yeah. We the North Pole, my most recent North Pole expedition was a lot like that. And that's why we we were talking a little bit about this earlier, just about, I kind of call myself the weakest link in everything that I do. And so I'm constantly trying to put myself in situations where I'm accountable to other things, other factors, or a schedule or a structure or whatever it is. And so in that situation, we prepackage that food partially just so we don't eat it all. And there's been more than one expedition that have failed as a result of that. And so, again, being the weakest link, we kind of know going in that these types of things can happen. That being said, we also try to plan for that so that we're not in that situation. But at the end of the day, it's like, it happens. And we would joke on this trip, we would eat a snack and then, you could just feel the calories wear off. It was like your gas tank was running out. And then you'd eat something and you could start moving again. And then an hour later it would wear off.
Yeah, because when you did your first expedition, the ice and the conditions were different. The second one, you're just like, that ice was crumpled and you had to climb over it and maybe more snowshoeing than you thought and just burning more calories. So you don't know how to prepare for that because you don't know what it's going to look like when you get out.
Yeah, and that's kind of the chess game of doing expeditions that are more in this unsupported style where you don't really have any sort of outside help. So you just have, again, this kind of timeline and distance that you're trying to cover and plan for it as best as you can. And so to me, that's really the challenge of modern day, quote unquote, exploration. We're not going there for the first time, but you're kind of pushing that human, that leading edge of adventure, so to speak. And that's, I think, an interesting challenge. It's totally made up at the end of the day, but it also fits my interests or strengths, I guess, and that it's a chess game. And so you have to be very deliberate. You have to be very disciplined because decisions and things that you do on day 1 or 2 or 5 impact, nearly 2 months down the road. And, I like that because you can't, you kind of gotta hold on all the time. And when you be like, oh yeah, I'm in control. I got this dialed. It's no problem. That's when all the issues start occurring. Yep. And so, maintaining that focus, is something that I enjoy, at like a mile per hour. It's not, we're like a snail out there, but it's this chess game, and that's the challenge, and that's part of why I'm drawn to that type of travel.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. What's your diet like when you're not out? I know you loved having those cookies when you got
out. Oh, yeah.
But what's your diet like home?
Yeah, I mean, again, we have a pretty Midwest fare. Neither one of my wife or myself really enjoys cooking, which is a bummer because as I've gotten older, I do like a good meal. And so, one of our favorite things is to come out to eat downtown here. It's just really nice. And I enjoy it so much more than I used to. So we have pretty, meat and potatoes, salads, whatever. But we have this thing with our kids is they got to try everything and eat everything. So.
And how old are the kids now?
8 and 5.
8 and 5. Merritt and
Ellie.
Yeah. Girl and a boy. Lucky.
Yeah.
I just had my girl at, I won't say.
Yeah.
But at an older age.
Yeah.
And then when you and Eric were out there and you're trying to make these decisions, I know when I'm working hard and I'm going 15 hours a day and I'm not burning extremely tons of calories when I'm running around, but my thought process changes. And how do you keep that critical thinking when you have these critical seconds to make a decision when you're hungry?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, everything is hard. And I like having these conversations about these trips because it reminds me of how much these situations really do apply to a lot of other situations that I'm in my normal life. But, we're in stressful, uncomfortable situations all the time where we are dealing with a lot of fear and uncertainty. And it's pretty easy to get, frustrated with whoever you're with. Doesn't matter how good of friends you are. It's just human nature. And so part of what we're trying to do is just set up systems where we're not involved with decision making together. And, and so for a trip like to the North Pole, we're switching off leads every hour. And so when Ryan is in front, he's making all the decisions. And oftentimes I can see much farther around than what he sees. I can see a better course of action, but I'll sometimes just follow him just to give him confidence in that decision, because what we can't do is really hesitate. And so we deal with and I'm not a big necessarily mantra guy, but we create a lot of these phrases and reminders to each other. And one of them was like decisive, confident, safe. And so because we're constantly making decisions, and there is never really a good outcome. It's just like two shitty decisions.
Yeah.
And you can sit there and waffle back and forth because here's a shitty way to go and here's a shitty way to go, but you're not moving anywhere if you do that. And so at a certain point, you just have to be decisive about that. This is the worst decision that I've ever made in my life. And so that's where that confidence comes in. It's like, hey, all right, we're doing it. And then for us, we're always kind of thinking about that idea of safety. Like we got to be going through situations where there's a modicum of safety.
And have you ever been out there with Ryan or any of your partners and been like, dude, what he's saying is crazy. Like, you obviously know his thought process is down a different path. Have you guys made those decisions, and how do you reach that conversation with your partner?
I mean, it's hard. I mean, I've had, so many arguments with people, and the hard part is when you remove everything from your life and put yourself in a situation where there's no other outside stimuli and all there is stress, really quickly you understand what's important. And so your best intentions might not add up when you're out in that situation, because all of a sudden you realize, oh, guess what? My family's the most important thing. Finishing this expedition is the most important thing. Making this film about the expedition and not setting this other record, or whatever it is. And so then you have these conflicts that arise as a result. And ultimately, there's times when we've never resolved it, and it's just, we're still out here together. We're stuck together. We're going to make it as best as we can. And I will say that as a result of some of those experiences, like my one factor for partners is really their ability to communicate, because the bottom line is there's going to be conflict no matter what. And the question is can you resolve that conflict? Can you have a discussion and you don't necessarily have to agree, but can you kind of find an amenable path forward?
Yeah. And has Ryan said to you, hey, Eric, what you said doesn't make sense right now?
Maybe not in those terms. That's a little more in touch with the feelings than Ryan tends to be. Sorry, Ryan, but it's true. Might just be F you,
Yep.
But the meaning is there. So yeah, it happens. But again, for that particular trip, you're also forced in these situations that are so intimate, and where your whole survival is contingent on another person. And for our culture, especially in the U.S., that's just not something that we're used to. Independent, strong, whatever. And those are great qualities. But to have to ask for help, to have to rely on somebody, those are hard things to try to relearn in that situation. And, me being a totally average person, I need to do that, like that's how we keep moving forward. So again, like everything else, it's just this kind of ongoing process that, most of the time I'm failing at it. And then every once in a while we get lucky and, we seem to have resolved something. But I will say about Ryan is, to this day, we're still great friends, and, he comes up here and hangs out, and so we'll just be like, remember that time? And he's like, yep.
I'd love to buy you guys both a pizza next time he's here. So you guys were on day 8 of your adventure, and then you guys got that like worst Arctic storm that you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And like, you're on a time crunch. You got to get there in this day, or the plane's not going to pick you up. And when do you make that decision of like, that was the only time that you've ever stopped?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, not in a polar. Mountaineering is a little different, but yeah. I mean, I texted my wife, and I was like, "We're done," and I was just like, "That's it." But I've been a failure so many times. It's just how it goes. Like it's hard in the moment, but I've done things that are so, not successful that it's just like, okay, here we are again, nice to see you again, old friend, So it's just, and there's a little bit of like gallows humor. It's like, okay, this is what we got, like you're not going to wish for something you don't have. But we also had commitments, we were doing some filming for Animal Planet, and I was just like, okay, well, we'll just be out here and whatever happens, happens. And that's kind of the mindset that I had. I will say Ryan was very steadfast in his focus, which really elevated me a lot. But yeah, I mean, and that's the interesting thing to me that I don't always get to talk about or even explain. But there's the physical aspect of these trips. There's the mental aspect of being out there. But then there's also this whole other pressure of what you're trying to accomplish and, the financial aspects of it. I mean, sponsorship for me is still hard. I mean, I have great sponsors, and it's totally different than when it was 20 years ago, and I love it. But it's still like we had to borrow $35,000 from Ryan's brother. It's not like people are handing me $1 million checks, like I'm not Alex Honnold. I'm not like any sort of famous sports star. And so there's a lot of pressure in that. And so like when we were sitting in Resolute, that's $6,000 of plane tickets just getting up to that point. I'm not a millionaire. And so there's that whole pressure that kind of starts sitting on you, and as well as all these other commitments that you make that start weighing you down. And so that's this whole other layer to that. And you look at, our culture doesn't really celebrate second place. And so if you're not first, you might as well be last. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Ricky Bobby. So, there's all that. So we're throwing the dice out there, and if it comes up short, we're done. And so that's the other part of that situation. Yeah, we're safe in that moment. But do you have radio contact with the people, and they're saying like the storm's going to last? We're looking at 2 days. We're looking at 48 hours. And luckily that morning. Yeah, I rarely get weather forecasts on expeditions, polar expeditions at least. Although I was in Greenland a couple years ago, and I was like, this shit is ridiculous, because there are these things called pitarax, which are these big winds that come out of nowhere, 60, 70 mile per hour. And it was just a crazy year. And I was like, okay, I'm checking weather now. But in the Arctic and Antarctic, knowledge can be a double-edged sword, because you're sitting in the tent and it's nuking outside. Your mind is like, it's nuking outside. It's somewhat comfortable in the tent. And so again, that's just one of those things where like, we need to travel, and the weather is the weather. And so oftentimes we just don't worry about it. And, that was just a situation where we couldn't travel, and we were just trying to get out and go as soon as we could. But we do have communication. So there's a satellite tracker that I can text through. I have a satellite phone as well. But I try to limit a lot of that stuff depending on what we're doing. At a certain point, that outside world is just pulling you away from where you need to be. And it can be really difficult to hone in on what you're doing. Yeah, and just, getting information that, that team dropped out, and then the single explorer guy is getting picked up, and does that help or hurt you? Well, knowing that they're dropping live flags, like you guys are like, we're doing it. That helped a little bit, because I remember Ryan was like, because we got dropped off, and these young Norwegian guys, they just took off. They were like twice as big as me. They were doing like handstand push-ups or whatever, and I was like, fuck. And Ryan's like, where do you think those are? And where do you think those guys are? I'm like, you can't even, don't think about it. Because we need to focus on what we're doing. That being said, like when we got information about those other teams, that was
a boost.
A boost. Yeah.
Mental boost. That's what I
was
like thinking.
15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we're like, oh fuck, we're still out here. They're like drinking hot chocolate and
they're back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was trying to put myself in that position and think about like, God, that might be like, yeah, I'm stronger than these guys and they're dropping like flies. I thought that was probably a good little boost for you guys.
Yeah.
Okay. This one was, I was like literally on the edge of my seat watching the film. And when Ryan fell in that, you went across and watching how that ice went and then knowing that like you made the decision to like, let's go, you did it. And then he fell in that water. Like what immediately goes through your head? I mean, you literally have minutes.
Yeah. I mean, it was the most helpless feeling that I've ever felt because I was in a place where I couldn't get to him at all. And so, to Ryan's credit, he was able to, kind of scramble up on a piece of ice and get up onto safety. And I'm laughing because...
And I mean, are you yelling at him at this point?
I mean, it was kind of my fault because I was like, dude, just go. Quit being such a wimp, And I just look back at that and just every time I think about it, I'm just so disappointed in myself because he could have kept going around, but I was like, we need to make mile, let's go. You got to just, at a certain point, we just got to be taking these risks. And this is one of those times and, man up, dude. And so it was totally my fault. It was totally my fault. And then feeling so helpless that I couldn't do anything. But I'm laughing because he got up on, he fell up into about here. He got up on some ice and then there was another thin section of ice that he had to go across. So he's like, okay, shoot, no problem. And then he fell in again. And then he was able to get out.
Did you ever for a split second think I should probably jump in and go get him?
No.
Or then you put yourself both in danger.
Way.
That doesn't even. Mm-mm. And how do those skills that you learn off ice help you make those critical decisions? Like, what did you think of when he first went in?
I was just like, we're fucked.
That's the first thing you thought.
Yeah, and he's gone. But you just act at a certain point, and it was just one of those situations where I knew that me going in was not going to make the situation any better. And so anytime you're in sort of an extreme situation, you're kind of going through this checklist of what you're doing. And so, luckily we just went down to that first step. Ryan gets himself out, If he can't get himself out, then we go down to the next step. And if that doesn't work, then we go down to the next step and then one right after the other. So luckily we were in a situation where Ryan was competent enough, the weather was decent enough where he was able, and the ice conditions were such that he could find a stable piece to climb out on.
Yeah. And you guys were, you don't always see all the stuff that you see on the film, stuff you cut out. And like, when he was holding his frozen sock and like, he seemed in pretty great spirits.
Yeah.
I made it out. Okay. I'm drying off. And he was good.
Yeah, and that's Ryan.
Positive.
And that's Ryan.
Lucky guy to go with.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
that.
we're not going to be talking about our feelings a lot of the times, but he did say to me, I said, because we're in the tent and there's just stuff going on. It's really hard to talk because the stoves are going, and it was about day 30, and I'm like, is it weird that we don't talk a lot? And he's like, yeah. Because I would get, we spend a lot of our days apart. We have a few little conversations at our breaks, and then when we get in the tent, I'm just focused on getting gear dried, eating, so I can go to sleep so we can do it again. And so I'm like laser focused, and so we didn't have a ton of conversations because we were just trying to, like, we're all just in our little thing. But Ryan is a very pragmatic personality type, and so he's been on Everest a bunch of times. He's done rescues on 8,000 meter peaks, and he's not wanting to get PTSD from any of that. Amazingly, I would be like bawling and like you'd not be able to walk down the street, but he just keeps going.
And speaking of that, you seemed emotional at a lot of those pieces during that trip, and you were talking about
that you can cut. I don't want, nobody knows.
You were emotional because you had it on your film. You were talking about when your son called two other people daddy at a party.
Yeah.
And you seemed a little choked up a little bit.
Totally.
And then, that's a whole nother mental game. That's like, I can't control what's going on back home. I got to keep my head in the game here. It's so important to be here. And, how do you compartmentalize those thoughts when you're out there and you're a little boy,
Yeah, it's still hard. And I'm an emotional guy just in general. Like, I lay it all out there. I wish I was tougher, but I'm not. So it's just how I am. But yeah, that aspect is a whole nother layer to it all. And to be doing life-threatening, physically challenging, mentally stressful things that are potentially putting you in a situation where you never see your family again is difficult. And it's also a detriment to your ability to succeed because it's kind of pulling you out. And so there's a point that always seems to happen where you just kind of put it away permanently. Like for a while, I'm trying to keep a little bit of connection, because I want to know what's happening. It's important to me to be part of my family.
But like having a picture of your kids on your compass isn't helping you.
No.
Okay.
No. And so what I always do, it's kind of like at a certain point, like after about a month and a half, it's like kind of keeping them in a box, and you don't open up the lid, but you just know that they're inside that box. And it's a tragic thing because you've basically cut ties with your life, but it's also a necessary thing because that's what you need to do to be able to get all that energy into moving forward because things are getting harder, things are getting more dangerous, and you need to be in that moment. And there's no other choice. So anything else is just done. And it's, like I said, it's a tragic moment because you basically just kind of give up on everything else, but it's what you need to do.
Yeah, and it's in the back of your head. It's in the box. It's there.
Yeah.
And, speaking of those dangerous positions, watching you in that, that water's what? What's the temperature of that water?
It's salt water, so it's like freezes a little colder than fresh water. So it's like 29 degrees.
So when you dropped in that water, when you were swimming over and you couldn't get up.
Yeah.
And did you guys ever talk about like carrying an ice pick with you so that
Well, we have those and I didn't bring them. Or I did. I brought them on the trip, but we'd come up to one lead after the next.
So you never had an experience where you couldn't get out of it?
Oh no, I've had every kind of experience, but I just, at that particular time, I didn't bring those ice picks with me. They were in my sled. It's like...
And we just forgot?
Yeah, or didn't think about it or whatever. I just looked over. I'm like, it's going to be fine.
Because you can look and see and be like,
Yeah, but what happens is the water kind of eats away at the lower edge of the ice, and so your feet kind of are underneath. And I was just exhausted. And... it was just, and the other thing is I have we're filming, and so I have a couple cameras, but one I just wear around my neck. And so it's right here. And so it kept getting caught on the lip of the ice as I was trying to pull myself up. And, it's just another one of those situations. And where, should I grab those ice picks? Definitely. Did I? No. And so I was in that situation. I could have swum back. It's not like I was totally out of it, but it was just like...
You're just using your energy. Watching yourself try to
and
push yourself
that situation messed me up a little bit. For just physically, I was already so exhausted and kind of using that energy. I could feel it for a couple days later, and it was just terrible. But the other nice part about it was that it was kind of like a rock bottom for me. And anytime you hit rock bottom, it's just like, it's not getting any worse from here, So 99% shit is still better than that.
Yeah, and I was like, remember that one time when you were, 19 miles away from reaching your goal and shit was getting serious. The ice was breaking up around you.
Yeah.
And when you're in that water, when you're swimming, do you think about a polar bear attacking you from under the water?
A little bit, yeah.
Has that ever happened?
Not that I'm aware of. We've seen seals in there, but I've never had an issue. Does that mean it's not possible? It probably is. It's dark, black water.
So you can't see anything.
So you're not looking. Anytime you don't know what's underneath you, there's the opposite. But it's like, I do mountaineering expeditions. I'm not an awesome mountaineer. I got to kind of white knuckle those trips, and it's kind of like just bringing that focus into just like what you can see. and there's all this other crap around there,
Still
and
look
it's there, but it's not, if you're checking it out, that's only taking away from your ability to keep moving forward. And so that's kind of what and it's almost like, I call it like taking a mental hand and like pushing that fear down, and you get better at it. You get better at just managing, like being in a situation where you're afraid and doing that. Like the first few times it's really hard, but then as you're in more situations where you're afraid and more afraid, you just are able to go into those situations much more efficiently. I don't think it's better, you're not less scared, but you're just more efficient at it.
Maybe you're putting the gun on the top of the sled.
Yeah.
Just getting a little bit more accessible.
Yeah.
And just like, looking around for polar bears. I mean, I was just blown away by the movie. Everybody needs to watch Melting. That's the name of it.
Yeah.
And how do we find it?
It's on Amazon. It's on iTunes. It's on Animal Planet Discovery. Every once in a while, it still plays internet. I'll get some email from Argentiners.
Yeah, phenomenal documentary. You guys got to watch it.
Well, and the thing, that was my third expedition in the North Pole, and I love all different kinds of adventures, and we were talking a little bit about Everest, and it doesn't necessarily come up in conversations as much, but the Arctic Ocean to me is such a unique environment, and I keep wanting to go back to do trips there because it's so different from any other place on the planet, and it's really people don't have a good understanding of what it's like. So I think one of my greatest successes is filming that and creating that piece, because it's a realistic look. We're not faking anything. We're filming it ourselves of what goes into that trip and that environment. And that to me is, I think, one of the most important things, for me personally, but also just when we look at, individuals, is like, what are we portraying? Are we portraying, this kind of false narrative, or are we kind of like calling it what it is? And to me, that was, I think, one of my greatest successes.
Yeah, I mean, it was just phenomenal to watch it. It was funny. I watched it, and I'm still thawing out from watching his documentary last night. I've got my Arctic gear on and my hat. I don't usually wear this stuff, but my husband was watching, and this morning he goes out, and I'm inside doing my stuff, and he goes out to snowboat 20 minutes, and he comes in and he's like, "Whoa, I'm freezing," and I'm like, "Really?" Dude. And I just was cracking up because like you're out there, you don't even get a break. It's not like when you get in your tent. Yeah. After 5:30, 6 o'clock, you're all toasty. When you had that shot of you laying in your tent, and it's like, there is how much nylon?
Yeah, just a couple
centimeters of.
Yeah.
Is that how you measure nylon?
I don't know. Yeah, whatever. Denier.
A couple pieces of fabric that is like between you and this outdoors. It's just insane. And just like when I watched all your stuff, I was like, they've got a film crew. Like,
I wish.
Who's filming all of them? I'm like, how do you deal with the filming and the batteries? I mean, I can barely keep my phone charged in my house, warm weather with plugs everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you?
Yeah, that's just a part of it. I mean, it takes extra energy, it takes extra weight, it takes extra time, effort, mental energy. My goal with expeditions has always been to try to take people along on these journeys that they might not be able to do or want to do. But that doesn't mean they're not interested about those places. That doesn't mean that those places aren't important from a kind of global planetary health perspective. And so that's always kind of been on my mission. And it's a pain in the ass most of the time, but it's also a great passion of mine, and it can be fun. And trying to capture those places in kind of ways that help people understand what they're like is a unique challenge for me. And so that's another layer that I like to personally add on to trips. It would be easier to not do any of that stuff, but I wouldn't have the same kind of fulfillment personally if I wasn't doing that.
Yeah, and to be completely honest with you, I didn't really know much about polar exploration before I started looking into it. But I was so like enamored by the whole thing, and I'm like so happy, and I feel so lucky that you got that stuff on film for so many people to experience. Because come on, most people aren't going there.
Yeah, totally.
It's not something that
people
can endure.
And I do feel like, when we look at our world, it's the human experience that really transcends these bigger ideas, and especially from an environmental perspective, these places can seem very abstract and far away and unimportant. And so when you can put some sort of human endeavor, I feel like adventure is just such an inherently interesting thing to people.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, there's a reason why Red Bull is just killing it with all their sponsored athletes. It doesn't matter if it's moto or snowcross or alpine skiing or whatever it is. Those are just inherently interesting. And so I think part of our makeup as humans has some sort of tie to that. And so I'm just trying to use it in this really boring way, which is polar travel, to be able to kind of get to that same place. But
yeah, I don't think it's boring at all. I really don't. And I just think it's so cool that, people that don't believe in global warming but you see the effects and how quickly, and that in a few summers, 30 years, what do you say, 30 years, it's going to be an ocean.
Yeah.
That it is going to be completely impossible to explore that region. And wow, man, kudos to you, because I think you're a god. It's pretty cool.
Nobody's a god.
It's pretty cool. But like in your world, and just being able to share that with so many people is just such a cool thing that you did, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, and I think that's part of the human condition. I think we all want to share our perspectives. What I've learned is like a lot of people have amazing stories. Like I've been like, oh yeah, I'm the best at this, and then there's somebody who could juggle like 50 balls, or you have all these amazing restaurants, or I mean, you walk down Elk, Crested Butte, and there's 100 people that have some sort of amazing story. So, I'm a huge fan of achieving some sort of excellence in whatever capacity it is, as well as just kind of finding your passion. And so for me, it just happened to manifest in these long, freezing cold sufferfests,
I love it. You should make bumper stickers. How do you deal with bathroom breaks out there at 30 below zero?
I mean, you just go. Well, we try to get on a good schedule. People's bodies are amazing. We're able to control our bodies in pretty amazing ways. And so, yeah.
Because you're not having fresh vegetables out there.
No, I mean, freeze-dried vegetables.
Yeah.
But you usually go in the morning, same way that you do, but outside and a lot quicker. And then,
do you pack it up and take it with you?
Depends on where we are. So, for example, like in Antarctica, yes, just in terms of leave no trace. And then on the Arctic Ocean, that's just going right into the ocean within not too long of a time. And so, similar to if you're hiking along the saltwater beach or whatever, it just stays there. So, yeah, I mean, everybody poops.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up.
But the hard part is when you get cold, and people may experience this, one of the first things that your body does is it's trying to get rid of any extra liquid in your body that it's keeping warm. And so if you start getting cold, you start peeing a lot right away. And so when it's really cold, like 50 below, I'm like trying to stay hydrated, but then all of a sudden I'm peeing like every 2 seconds, and it gets kind of annoying because you can't see. I remember one time I was just like peeing all over my legs, and my buddy's like, "Hey, you're peeing all over your legs." I'm like, "Doesn't matter."
I mean, does it freeze that fast?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then you just like can flick it up.
I make more or less. I make soup every day, and we put a bunch of butter in that soup, and we have it in a jar. And I remember one time I had the soup, and I had my mittens on, and so the outside was a little slippery, and I was like, whoa, and it spilled all the butter on top of it, like right on the zipper of my sled bag, and about 6 inches or 7 inches, and that was solid frozen butter for a month. I couldn't open that part of my sled just because it's just rock hard.
You don't know until it happens.
Yeah.
Rock hard. Oh my God, that's insane. I'm going to switch topics for a minute. I want to talk about, because you've had a lot of success. You've completed a lot of these. You've made it to the finish line of a lot of
slightly less success than I've had failures. So,
failures are a big part of them. I've had a lot, and continue to. I still have them. back in 2012 when you did the 730 mile biking.
Yeah.
And that was to the South Pole.
Almost, yeah.
What happened? You had to stop?
Well, that was, I mean, again, part of my goal is like I look around the world and I'm trying to be like, okay, how can I be unique? How can I be creative in what I do? How can I push my own personal limits? I love bikes. I spend so much time on a bike. I find joy, and I always felt back in the day it was a choice between bikes and expeditions. And so back in the 2010s when fat bikes started coming around, I was like, wait a minute here. Here's something. And I had, you know, as I'm skiing across Antarctica day after day after day, I'm like, this surface is pretty hard, you know, for a long time. Would it be possible? And so that's kind of where the idea came from. And back then, I was on the Surly Moonlander, which had just come out. And yeah, I mean, my son had just been born 2 months earlier. My wife was pissed that I was leaving, understandably. But I wanted to try this trip. I had been working on the project for a couple years, was up in Hudson Bay training, testing gear, and felt like, yeah, I wanted to ride my bike to the South Pole, something that nobody had done before. And it kind of ticked a lot of boxes for me in terms of like how I like to do things.
So how come you didn't finish that one?
I think because ultimately I gave up.
Your head wasn't in the game.
No, it wasn't. You're right. It wasn't in the
baby.
game. I always feel that way, but it was more about the surface conditions. And so I just ended up walking my bike a lot, and most of the time basically. And so what I didn't want to do is have a bike walking expedition to the South Pole. And I don't like to say things are impossible, but it's kind of impossible. And you know, in hindsight, looking back, I made a really ambitious plan, but it's hard. You know, like what would have been better to do? Go down to Antarctica ahead of time, do a bunch of training down in that environment. That would have cost me 50, 60 grand, you know, minimum. And so I wasn't in a position where I could be like, oh, I'm going to spend that this year and then 100 grand the next year on this trip and have everything dialed. At a certain point, you know, you just got to take a risk. And, you know, I like that actually. I like going off and into that where you don't know what's going to happen. And, you know, the bottom line is sometimes you come up short with your tail between your legs. And people are like, I told you so. And everybody's like, better luck next time. And, well, you get a good effort. But that's how it goes, you know? And so, you know, I was down in Antarctica a couple years ago trying to do another ski speed record and fell short on that one too, you know? And I'm not going to stop trying. And it's just trying to, you know, be true to myself, you know, learn from those mistakes, as cliched as that sounds, and keep going on that path. But when you try hard things that you know nobody has done or that are at that leading edge, like the chances of success are limited. That's just how it goes. And so what the problem is when you look at that not succeeding in your objective as the end point, that's just, you know, that's just a little bump in the road. You know, once you start I'm still going, you know, so none of those are real failures. But it's hard. And, you know, like we were talking earlier, like we're if you're not winning, you're losing, you know.
One of my favorite, I think I came up with this quote, actually. I should put my name at the end of it, but I say it all the time: jump and the parachute will open.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not afraid to I'm a very big risk taker in a lot of stuff. And I feel like people are just so held back because they're afraid.
Totally.
And just jump, take the first step. You know, you said that the first step is the most important.
Yeah.
You know, and that's definitely something I want to get across to our listeners today is like, if you have something that you like is burning in there, there's no right path. You said that too.
Yeah.
Just go, jump, and the parachute will open. I mean, that's my philosophy.
Hopefully,
and
yeah.
Sometimes you get yourself in some trouble.
Yeah. Well, with big risks come big rewards. And so in order, you know, and I'm not just the guy that wants just a little bit of something. You know, I want the whole enchilada. And so you have to endure a lot of crap to be able to get to that point, and you got to take risks, and there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and you're going to, you know, lose some face at some point. And, but that's normal, you know? And so that's the problem, I think, with our culture today, is that we are afraid to take those risks for fear of, you know, being embarrassed or looking stupid or just being called a failure in any capacity or not being perfect or whatever it is. And ultimately, I think that's the exact wrong way, you know. And, you know, I think about it a lot with like different companies and stuff too. It's like, you got to be willing to try different things. And then again, for me, it's about like, how can I do things better and different than what already is out there? And I think that's part of it too, is you like to be able to get to that level, you got to be comfortable with those risks.
How do you feel about, you know, the stuff we see on the media about all the oxygen tanks and all the garbage and the lineup of people? Is it really like that up there?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I was there in the fall, so there was myself and a few Sherpas, and then a Czech team and a Japanese team. The Czech and Japanese team dropped off, and then it was just us. So we were the only team on the entire mountain for about almost a month.
I mean, that's a huge.
So it's a very different experience than what you see in the spring. So we were really self-contained. I guess my short answer is yes and no. I think a lot of that is the same, but it's also changing. You know, like this was 10 years ago that I was on Everest. I had to pay, I don't know, a $10,000 trash deposit or whatever it is, $8,000, I can't remember, so that we're bringing that stuff off as well. There's a lot more regulations. Nepal, though, is the poorest country, one of the poorest countries, or the poorest country. So there's that aspect of it too, and tourism brings in a lot of money to that area. So it's a multifaceted issue. I think I think personally, and I get in some discussions with this, it's not a favorable opinion, but you know, and what I do, and I do a lot of kind of extreme guiding as well. And I've settled into this idea of like, expedition style travel. Self-contained expedition style travel. The problem that you have is that some of the adventure industry is trying to turn that into adventure tourism. And in adventure tourism, you're going to extreme environments and being as comfortable as you can. And so that mentality is just as much of a fault as all this other stuff, because people feel that they should be able to go to places like Camp 2 on Everest and sit in a chair. And part of it is historically how those expeditions were done as well. And so I feel one of my kind of like Don Quixote charging at windmills, and I can't say too much because people get pissed at me, is like there's value in wilderness travel. And part of the reason why I like wilderness travel and adventure travel is because you have less. You have a finite amount of resources that you're dealing with. And you have a contained, backpack or sled or whatever it is. And that's how you're living. And I think in our day today, like we want everything all the time, and so that less thing is more the exception than the norm. And so I think we need to embrace a little more of that kind of expedition mentality of having less, of having not what you want, but just what you need. And I think if you were to apply that to a lot of these mountaineering situations, you would have a much different kind of everything there.
Yeah, especially when you look at people who like, and I'm not judging at all, but there's operations where they'll bring all the food for you. You don't have to carry anything. You got everything that you need.
And that's where the money is, and so I get it. And
but how do you feel though, as an explorer, that like bust your basically fucking ass to do these, and someone can stroll in?
Yeah,
and be carried.
I mean, nobody can just stroll in a lot of the stuff and the polar stuff, but and the mountaineering side of things is a little different. Personally, it's not my style. So that being said, it's not exploration, it's adventure travel. Mm-hmm. And so I don't look at it the same way. The issue that I have with it is when people portray it as exploration on a personal level. And so again, they're twisting that narrative to suit what they feel people should look at them. Whereas, somebody's tying their crampons, carrying their gear, making all their meals. It's a totally different situation on an adventure when somebody else is making even just one decision, let alone every single decision. And so I think there's a lot of value in adventure travel and being able to have access to those places. I think it could be done safely. I do think it needs to be regulated and permitted a little differently. And I think a mentality shift would change things dramatically. Do I think that's going to happen? No way.
Yeah. One of my points there was you get so much more accomplishment when you do it yourself, when you're doing the hard work yourself, no matter what it is, in business, in relationships, in, fighting cancer, like doing the research, getting the knowledge and putting the effort in yourself makes such a big difference in like the outcome. So my point there was.
Yeah, no, which I get it. I'm in it. When you are able to do something yourself, the rewards are so huge, but it takes a lot of effort. And that's the hard part. And there's also another aspect, which is kind of this uncertainty unknown, and again, it's why people, and kind of this idea of community, I think people are really drawn to community, myself included, but like why people run marathons and want to do a bunch of, they'll run a marathon here. And so it's kind of this established thing that they can challenge, they can have this small challenge versus this huge thing of like, oh, I got to map out a 26-mile route around here. I don't even know how to navigate anything. So part of it is that as well. And then I think with Everest specifically, it's an enigma, and so there's been a whole bunch of crazy stuff that's gone on that's just kind of fueled the fire.
Everybody talks about climbing up. And then when you summit, you have a long way down.
Yeah.
What's it like? What's that whole... Just give me a quick tidbit on like coming down from Everest.
Well, it's easier. I'll tell you that much. It's easier to go down than up. Everest to me was a unique challenge in the sense that I had never done an 8,000 meter peak before. And I think the other thing that happened to us is like we were kind of fixing our ropes as we were going up. And by the time we got to the South Summit, we ran out of rope. Because normally nowadays it's done by several Sherpa teams over a couple days. And so we were just kind of just our own little group doing it on our own. And by the time we got to the South Summit, we had run out of rope, and then it was a whiteout too. And I just remember being like, we're done. This is not a good idea. Because between the South Summit, there's a ridge line, and then there's the Hillary Step. And... and
for the listeners that don't know, obviously, he is the only guy on the entire planet to summit Mount Everest in the fall.
No. North Pole, South Pole, and Everest all in 1 year.
All in 1 year.
Yeah.
In 1 year.
Yeah.
So why did you choose the fall? I was curious about that.
Yeah, well, it had a lot to do with the schedule of when you could do each one of those expeditions. So Antarctica, the season is November, December, and January. So our winter, Antarctic summer. North Pole, the traditional North Pole season, when you can actually fly a plane and land up there, is March, April, and May, and that's the Everest season. So initially I had wanted to do, it's easier to do Everest. There's more infrastructure in the spring, but when I was fundraising, that was, I was starting out working on that project in 2007, 2008, the housing crisis. How many times can you get no over sponsorship? So I was like just begging for anything. And so, when I would have liked to have done Everest in an easier time, I didn't have any of the sponsorships or whatever. So I was like, all right, well.
So it was just the way it laid out.
Yeah.
It was just the way it played out.
But I liked it, like it fit, it ended up, it wasn't necessarily by design totally, partially it was, but I liked, it fit me and my aesthetic and how I like to do things a little bit better. So I was pleased about that. But yeah, so we were on the South Summit. It was a total whiteout, and I was like, man, this is not good. And then no fixed lines. And I was like, let's turn around. And this guy cheering was like, you sure? And I just didn't answer him because I didn't want to, because I knew I was sure. But sometimes you just got to like bring it in a little bit, and so we kind of all laid down in the snow for a while and just got lucky. And there was a little blue circle of clearing, and we ended up finding some old rope underneath the south summit, and we got over, went up the Hillary step, and I was like, oh, this is easier than what I anticipated, because it was all snowy, so I was just like sticking my arms in the snow, and myself, like everybody else, had read so many stories about there. And then from the top of the Hillary step, it's just a little bit of slope to the summit, and I was just relieved, but it was just a blue circle around us and then clouds everywhere. So there was no great view. I have pictures that are terrible, and so we took a few pictures and basically flipped it and started heading down. And that was a little stressful because then the clouds were just rolling in. And we had also been kind of poaching some of our ropes. And so we were kind of unprotected at times. And it was just kind of, again, focusing on, like good crampon technique and knees over your toes and not like catching a crampon on my pants that I tumbled down. And by the time we got to the like balcony, it was like a whiteout. And I remember getting down to the south call and just being like on my hands and knees looking for our tracks back to the tent. But then so it was nerve wracking.
What's your heart rate at that point?
I don't know.
Like, what are you feeling? Like, what's the feeling? Like the physical.
The feeling is, I mean, I think there's just an overlying fatigue, and there's a pragmatism. Like I was relieved that we got to the top. I was $80,000 in debt for that trip. I was in base camp calling my sponsors, being like, did you mail the check yet? I got to kind of pay these guys. Like, they're getting pissed here. And I would be like to those guys, I'm like, it's a national holiday in the States right now. All the banks are closed.
You took a pissed and leave.
So, I had a lot riding on that trip, all three of those trips. But I was all in, but I was still willing to pull the plug. So I was relieved that part of it was over. I didn't feel like I was out of the clear, like, oh yeah, it's smooth sailing, no problem. We're going to just get, like skip down or whatever. And so there was a lot of stress, and for me, every time I went up and down the Khumbu ice fall, I got more nervous because you just see how quickly that changes. Because it's a moving glacier. It's
different when you went down.
Yeah. So, but every time you go up and down, some serac would have fallen down or some big column or whatever. And so, we spent the night at the South Col, and then the next morning kind of came down the Lhotse face, got back to Camp 2, and then kind of headed down the Western Khum, and it was snow like up to our thighs. I mean, it was just, we eked it out right in the right time. And then finally, when I got down to base camp that evening, I was like, okay, yeah, now I feel good. And the best part of that whole trip was, we packed up pretty quickly. We're all like, okay, let's get out of here. And we basically like skipped and hopped down the Khumbu. And, we were like jumping off first of all, we were just, our lungs were like monsters, and it was a whole Sherpa team and just myself. So 5 people. There was no other Western people. It was again, I didn't necessarily set out to have it be this way, but it was a really nice result that those Sherpas got elevated in a way that gave them a lot of credibility and pride and prestige. And so we were skipping and jumping, and the fall's big tourist time, in October. And so there's tons of people coming up, and we're just running around them. And everybody, every time we would get to a little village, people would just be handing us beers. And it was just that was an amazing experience. Just kind of being able to share that success with those guys in a way that they probably got more out of that trip than I did.
Yeah, just a way more intimate deal.
Yeah, and we, of course, we're still all in contact, and like this was a 10-year anniversary of that trip. Nobody summited in fall since. And, everybody still like, that was a big deal.
So cool. Yeah. That's amazing. I'm so blown away by it.
Yeah. And it was fun for me too. That was, I'd been to India previously and some other places, but a lot of my polar trips were not dealing with any people or different cultures. And so to me, that was a really incredible aspect of that trip, was just, again, as a dumb kid from Wisconsin, to learn a lot about these different cultures and how those guys dealt with some of these stressful situations as well, and kind of their calmness in a lot of those situations and demeanor, as well as just the overall kind of religious aspect of them being there, to me was a really awesome part of that trip. And, I'm just like, okay, when are we going to take the kids over and do some trekking over there? 'Cause it's pretty soon.
Yeah. One of my goals, I took my son out of the Crested Butte school for 6 weeks, right in the middle of the school year. And the teachers were like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to India and Nepal. And
totally.
And we're going.
Yeah.
And he got to see all the Sherpas, and it was just I love that. I love that culture, and I love those people there. And I feel so lucky to have that like intimate connection with them here. You know?
Yeah. It's funny because you think people are the same wherever you go, and in one sense they are, but I will say that there are certain cultures that are more gentle, more kind, and definitely the Sherpa culture is one of those for sure.
How are you going to handle getting older and not being able to do these physical things that you love so much? Have you thought about that?
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Blues Brothers?
Yes.
The Bluesmobile?
Mm-hmm.
They drive that thing all over the place, and they do that huge car chase through Chicago, and they finally get to that building. They get out of it, and the whole thing collapses. That's me right now. It's hard. It's hard. My body isn't the same. And so I broke my collarbone this summer.
Falling off a bike?
Yeah, stupid on a cattle guard. I wasn't paying attention. Never have broken a bone in my life. And so when we were talking about all this stuff, everything's connected. Like my physical body is connected to like all these other things, and so it's a daily thought in my head is like how like I can't fake it. I teach a polar training course in January, and I'm like, I used to just be able to show up. Now I'm like, okay, I gotta get going here.
And, we're the same age,
Yeah.
You start to feel it.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's that.
And, but that's fine. I'm smarter too. And, the things I've done have never really been about being the strongest or the fastest. And so there's a lot of things that go into it, but I see the end coming. And, but what I've learned is I've been able to adapt in some really positive ways over time. What I was doing 15 years ago is still somewhat the same, but I also do a lot of other things too. And so I just kind of have to remind myself that, I'm a pretty creative thinker. I'm willing to take opportunities. And I also know that like as you get older, you kind of, as much as like, I'm like, when I was 25, I'm like, I'm going to be partying and crazy forever. There's no way that that's ever going to change, and that changed. So I'm sure I'll have some sort of, newer insight, but it's definitely for right now, there's a much more diligence on kind of fitness. I've never been a yoga guy, but I'm like just too old school for my own good. And not by being a curmudgeon, but just by default. That's just how we grew up. And so now I'm just trying to break out of some of those patterns because, this thing's getting a little rusty.
I'm a big yoga fan. So you wrote a book, you made a film, you're married to a beautiful woman, you have 2 beautiful kids, you've taught more courses than you can count, and you've been on more expeditions than you can count. What's next for you?
I still have the fire. And I still have, I think, I'm drawn to a lot of big ideas. and ideas about, still kind of circling around this idea of adventure, but the value of that. And so just trying to find ways in which I can communicate that to other people, and whether that's, films, still, shorts, writing. Last time we had a 4th of July parade in town, I decorated my car up as a big iceberg and then passed out ice cubes.
Awesome.
And so I never want to take myself too seriously as well. I think there is a role for entertainment and lightheartedness in our world. And so it's kind of down that path. But I have a long list of adventures that I still want to do. I still want to be on that leading edge, but I want to be in Crested Butte more. I want to ride my mountain bike every day in the summertime. I want to do a lot of awesome trips with the kids and our family. So, I'm a boring person, so I just kind of keep doing my little thing, and but still at the same time trying to be as good as I can be, try to find those edges where people aren't, trying to find that creativity inside myself to be able to express kind of these ideas that, with expeditions that I feel like are important for people to understand, express those in compelling ways, create these experiences where people are just kind of overwhelmed by the information that they're getting in terms of like what these environments are like. And so I have a long list of arbitrary projects that I want to do and kind of keep working on.
I'm excited to see what you do next. I love that you've traveled all over the world and he's made Crested Butte his home. Well, I really want to thank you. A lot of people told me to reach out to you, and I'm super excited because I do love a lot of the stuff that you do. I think you're inspirational. I'm going to have a bunch of show notes where you can learn more about Eric and his cool adventures. I wanted to thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, I
appreciate
the conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to have a little longer conversation and kind of talk about some of these bigger ideas. I do feel like it's important, even for myself. Like, I got to pick myself up by my bootstraps and kind of give myself the pep talk a lot. So I do feel like these things have a lot of value. So thank you very much.
Awesome.